We're going to read this book today. It's called The Relatives Came. Do you know what a relative is? It's family. Family that lives far away. So even though my relatives are my brothers and sisters, my mom and my dad, relatives can also mean the family that I know that's far away, like my cousins, or my aunts, my uncles, or my cousins' children, or my grandparents. They're all my relatives. This book is called The Relatives Came. The author is Cynthia Rylant. She wrote the words. And the illustrator, Gammell, drew all the pictures. The Relatives Came. It was in the summer of the year when the relatives came. They came up from Virginia. They left when their grapes were nearly purple enough to pick, but not quite. They had an old station wagon that smelled like a real car, and in it they put an ice chest full of soda pop and some boxes of crackers and some bologna sandwiches, and up they came from Virginia. They left at 4 in the morning when it was still dark, before even the birds were awake. What happened to the mailbox? Why didn't they stop and fix it? Oh, they're going somewhere. They had to leave really early in the morning, didn't they? Yeah. They packed soda pop and crackers and bologna sandwiches and got in the car before it was even light out, when it was still dark. They drove all day long and into the night, and while they traveled along, they looked at the strange houses in different mountains, and they thought about their almost purple grapes back home. They thought about Virginia. But they thought about us, too, waiting for them. Do you think they're taking a long trip? I do too. Why do you think that? It told us they got in the car really very early when it was still dark. It told us that they put food and drinks in their car, and that they drove all day long and into the night. So they were in their car a long time. They must be on a long trip. But we can figure it out not just from the words in the text. We can figure it out from the illustration. What in the illustration makes me think that they were on a long trip? Yeah, look at all the stuff on top of their car. And it was dark out here, and here it's daytime. So they were definitely driving for a long time, because I can see. Here we had the moon out. It was dark. And they just kept driving. So they drank up all their pop and ate up all their crackers and traveled up all those miles until finally they pulled into our yard. Who do you think is telling this story? I think it's these kids too. How do you know it's them telling the story and not them? Are they the ones that drank the pop? That's soda. And they're the ones that eat the crackers. And our author keeps saying they drank up all their pop. They ate all their crackers. They traveled up all those miles until finally they pulled into our yard. Then it was hugging time. Talk about hugging. Those relatives just passed us all around their car, pulling us against their wrinkled Virginia clothes, crying sometimes. They hugged us for hours. Then it was into the house, and so much laughing and shining faces and hugging in the doorways. You'd have to go through at least 4 different hugs to get from the kitchen to the front room. Those relatives. And finally, after a big supper, 2 or 3 times around until we all got a turn at the table, there was a quiet talk, and we were in 2s and 3s through the house. So eventually they broke off into smaller groups. The relatives weren't particular about beds, which was good since there weren't any extras. So a few squeezed in with us, and the rest slept on the floor, some with their arms thrown over the closest person, or some with an arm across one person and a leg across another. Let's think about that word particular. We're going to go back and reread the sentence and think about another word that would fit and make sense. That'll help us figure out what the word particular means. The relatives weren't particular about beds. Picky. Maybe I could put that word in there. Let's see if it sounds right and makes sense with the pictures. The relatives weren't picky about beds. That might fit. So maybe particular means kind of picky. It was different going to sleep with all that new breathing in the house. The relatives stayed for weeks and weeks. They helped us tend the garden, and they fixed any broken things they could find. Tend. Let's figure out what that word means. We're going to reread the sentence and think about what they did to the garden. They helped us tend the garden. Let's look at the picture. Are they taking care of the garden? They are. So tend might mean to take care of. They ate up all our strawberries and melons, then promised we could eat up all their grapes and peaches when we came to Virginia. But none of us thought about Virginia much. We were so busy hugging and eating and breathing together. Finally, after a long time, the relatives loaded up their ice chest and headed back to Virginia at 4 in the morning. We stood there in our pajamas and waved them off in the dark. We watched the relatives disappear down the road. Then we crawled back into our beds that felt too big and too quiet. We fell asleep. Why did their beds feel too big? Why were they too quiet? I think they got used to all those relatives being there, and now that the relatives left, it feels a little empty. And the relatives drove on all day long and into the night, and while they traveled along, they looked at the strange houses and different mountains, and they thought about their dark purple grapes waiting at home in Virginia. But they thought about us too, missing them, and they missed us. And when they were finally home in Virginia, they crawled into their silent, soft beds and dreamed about the next summer. Summer is a great time for visiting family and going on trips. Why do you think so many families travel in the summer to see their relatives?